The diner went completely silent when the biker leader stood up. He had been sitting quietly at the counter, his black leather vest hanging heavily over his broad shoulders, when his eyes landed on the waitress's face. There was a fading bruise near her cheekbone, another mark hidden beneath her sleeve, and something in the way she flinched whenever the front door opened told him those injuries were not accidents. For years, people in the small town of Millbrook, Texas, had feared Marcus Hale and the motorcycle club he led. They were big, intimidating men covered in tattoos, riding thunderous motorcycles that could be heard several streets away. But that morning, nobody expected the most feared man in town to become the only person willing to stand between a frightened waitress and the person hurting her. Before we continue, if you believe that kindness can give someone a second chance and that protecting the vulnerable is more important than judging appearances, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. You never know whose life might be changed by a simple story about compassion. It was just after 7 on a cold Tuesday morning when Marcus walked into the Sunrise Diner with 5 members of his motorcycle club. The diner sat beside an old highway outside Millbrook, surrounded by dusty fields and aging gas stations. Every morning, truck drivers, farmers, construction workers, and elderly locals gathered there for coffee and breakfast. The place smelled of bacon, toast, and freshly brewed coffee, and the sound of silverware against plates usually made it feel warm and safe. That morning, however, something felt different. The waitress serving the counter was a young woman named Rachel Carter. She was 28 years old, though exhaustion had made her look older. Her brown hair was tied into a loose bun, and she wore the diner's faded gray cardigan over a white blouse. She moved quickly between tables, carrying coffee pots and plates while trying not to draw attention to herself. Marcus had seen her before. She was usually cheerful, always remembering customers' orders and offering an extra cup of coffee to elderly regulars. But that morning she barely looked anyone in the eyes. When she reached Marcus's table, she accidentally dropped the spoon. The tiny metallic sound made her freeze. Marcus noticed. He noticed the way her shoulders tightened. He noticed the way she looked toward the entrance. And when she bent down to pick up the spoon, her sleeve moved slightly, revealing dark fingerprints around her wrist. Marcus said nothing. Not yet. Rachel picked up the spoon and continued serving the table. A few minutes later, a loud truck pulled into the diner parking lot. The moment Rachel saw the vehicle through the window, the color disappeared from her face. She almost dropped the coffee pot. Marcus followed her eyes. A large black pickup had stopped outside. Rachel quickly turned away, pretending to organize cups behind the counter. One of Marcus's closest friends, Caleb Morris, noticed the change too. But Marcus lifted his hand slightly, telling him not to interfere. The diner door opened. A man walked inside. He was tall, wearing an expensive jacket and polished boots. His name was Travis Boone, a local businessman who owned several construction companies around Millbrook. Everyone knew him. He was wealthy, influential, and connected to half the town. Rachel looked terrified. Travis walked straight toward the counter. He didn't need to raise his voice. His presence alone made her nervous. Marcus watched carefully as Travis leaned toward Rachel and whispered something. Rachel nodded quickly. Then Travis grabbed her wrist. It lasted only a second, but it was enough. Marcus saw Rachel wince. Something inside him changed. He slowly stood from his chair. The scrape of his boots against the diner floor sounded louder than it should have. Every head turned. The biker leader walked toward the counter. Travis released Rachel's wrist. Marcus stopped a few feet away. He didn't threaten him. He didn't shout. He simply looked at Rachel's bruised wrist and then at Travis. The silence became unbearable. Rachel shook her head slightly, almost begging Marcus not to get involved. Marcus understood that look. It was the look of someone who had been threatened so many times that even help frightened them. Marcus stepped back, for the moment, but he wasn't finished. Travis eventually left the diner, and the moment his truck disappeared down the road, Rachel hurried into the kitchen. Marcus waited. He knew fear could not be forced into disappearing. After breakfast, Marcus left the diner with his club, but instead of riding home, he stopped outside the building. He told Caleb to stay nearby. Then he did something that shocked everyone who knew him. He called the town sheriff. Marcus had never been friendly with Sheriff Owen Reed. Their relationship had always been complicated. The sheriff had arrested Marcus several times in his younger years, and Marcus had spent years believing that law enforcement only cared about people who could afford lawyers. But this time, Marcus didn't call about himself. He called about Rachel. He told the sheriff what he had seen. The sheriff asked whether Marcus had proof. Marcus admitted he didn't, but he told him about the bruises, the fear, and the way Rachel reacted when Travis entered the diner. The sheriff promised to look into it. Marcus wasn't satisfied, so he began watching, not stalking Rachel, protecting her. Every morning, one of the bikers quietly parked near the diner. They never entered as a group. They never caused trouble. They simply made sure Rachel could finish her shift without being followed. For the first few days, nothing happened. Then one evening, Rachel disappeared. Her car was found behind the diner with the driver's door open. Marcus arrived within minutes. Her phone was lying on the ground. Her purse was still inside the vehicle. And on the pavement was one broken button from the jacket Travis had been wearing. Marcus's heart sank. The sheriff arrived soon afterward. This time, there was no hesitation. They began searching. Hours passed. Then one of Marcus's club members spotted headlights near an abandoned farmhouse outside town. The sheriff's deputies arrived first. Marcus and his men stayed behind the police line. Inside the farmhouse, they found Rachel. She was frightened, exhausted, and crying, but alive. Travis was arrested. The investigation that followed revealed something even more disturbing. Rachel had been afraid of Travis for months. She had once worked for one of his companies, where she had discovered financial records that suggested employees were being cheated out of wages. When Rachel threatened to report what she had found, Travis began threatening her. At first, the threats were subtle. Then they became physical. Rachel had gone to the police once, but she withdrew the complaint after Travis warned that he would destroy her family financially. She had been surviving by working at the diner. Every bruise she carried had a story. Every nervous glance had a reason. And every morning she had walked through those diner doors pretending everything was fine because she had no idea where else to go. The town learned the truth within days. People who had once whispered about Rachel began whispering about Marcus. They couldn't understand why a biker gang leader had gone so far to protect a waitress. But what they didn't know was that Marcus understood her fear better than anyone. 20 years earlier, his younger brother had been beaten badly by a group of men who believed nobody would stand up for him. Marcus had been too young, too angry, and too reckless to know how to help. His brother survived, but the experience changed Marcus forever. He eventually built the motorcycle club into something different. From the outside, they looked frightening. But behind closed doors, they repaired motorcycles for struggling families, delivered groceries to elderly residents during storms, raised money for injured veterans, and helped teenagers find jobs. Marcus rarely talked about those things. He didn't want praise. He believed real kindness didn't need an audience. Rachel eventually returned to the diner. The first morning she came back, she stood behind the counter trembling. She expected people to stare. Instead, the elderly customers greeted her normally. A truck driver left a generous tip. A farmer brought flowers. And Marcus walked through the door carrying a small wooden box. Inside was a new nameplate for her uniform. It simply read, Rachel. She stared at it for a long moment. Her old nameplate had been broken during the night she disappeared. Marcus had made a replacement. That tiny gesture broke the wall she had built around herself. She cried, not because she was hurt, because for the first time in months, she felt safe. But Marcus wasn't done. He discovered that Rachel had been struggling financially because she had missed weeks of work and had legal expenses from the case. So his club organized a fundraiser. They didn't announce it publicly. They simply began calling local businesses. One donated groceries. Another paid her rent for 3 months. A mechanic repaired her car. A lawyer agreed to help her with the legal case without charging her. And when Rachel eventually asked who had organized everything, everyone pointed toward Marcus. He simply shook his head. He told her it wasn't about him. It was about giving someone the chance to stand again. Months passed. Travis eventually faced multiple criminal charges related to the assault, kidnapping, threats, and financial misconduct. Rachel testified. Her voice shook at first, but she finished. When she walked out of the courthouse, Marcus and his club were waiting across the street. They didn't cheer. They didn't celebrate. They simply stood there. One by one, they nodded at her. Rachel smiled through tears. That day, something changed in Millbrook. People stopped seeing Marcus and his bikers as monsters. They started seeing them as men who had chosen to use their strength differently. And Marcus himself changed too. He began visiting local schools, speaking to teenagers about choices, consequences, and second chances. He told them that being strong wasn't about making people afraid. Real strength was being powerful enough to hurt someone, but choosing to protect them instead. A year later, the Sunrise Diner was busier than ever. Rachel had become the manager. She had saved enough money to enroll in community college and was studying business administration. One morning, Marcus walked through the door. Rachel smiled immediately. She placed a cup of coffee in front of him without asking. Some things had become routine. Marcus looked around the diner. The red booths were full. Families were laughing. Truck drivers were eating breakfast. Children were running toward their parents. Sunlight poured through the windows. And Rachel was no longer looking at the door with fear. She was looking toward the future. Marcus smiled quietly. He had walked into that diner expecting nothing more than breakfast. Instead, he had discovered that sometimes the people who look the most intimidating are carrying the biggest lessons about compassion. And sometimes the person who needs saving isn't looking for a hero. They simply need one person to notice. One person to believe them. One person to stand beside them when everyone else is looking away. If this story touched your heart, please don't just watch and scroll away. Like the video, share it with someone who believes in kindness, and subscribe to the channel so more stories like this can reach people who need a little hope. And before we end, I have one special request for you. Comment, "Kindness still matters," if you believe that one good person can change someone else's life. Because Rachel's story wasn't really about a biker gang. It wasn't about fear. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about a simple human choice. Marcus could have looked away. He could have told himself that Rachel's problems weren't his business. He could have judged her, ignored her bruises, and walked out of that diner like everyone else had done before. But he noticed. And sometimes, noticing is where courage begins. The bruises eventually faded. The fear eventually became a memory. But the kindness Rachel received remained with her. And years later, whenever someone asked her what changed her life, she never mentioned the courtroom, the arrest, or the headlines. She talked about one quiet morning in a small Texas diner, a frightened waitress, a table full of intimidating bikers, and one man who looked at her bruised wrist and decided that her pain mattered. Because sometimes, the greatest heroes don't wear uniforms. Sometimes they wear black leather. Sometimes they arrive on roaring motorcycles. And sometimes, beneath the roughest exterior, there is a heart that simply refuses to let another human being suffer alone.